Japan rose from the ashes of World War II to become one of the largest and most developed economies in the world. Today, Japan has the world's third largest economy based on GDP and the fourth largest economy based on purchasing power. Its culture is well known around the world and is often ranked among the world's most innovative countries, and is considered as a global leader in the automotive, robotics, and electronics industries. But there's another side to Japan's economic growth. The rapid rise to become the second largest economy in the 1980s was followed by a severe economic crash, forcing millions of people to be completely isolated from society, without access to jobs and means to live a normal and happy life. On top of it all, Japan has a shrinking population problem, testing the future of its economic growth. Japan was already a growing industrial economy before World War II and was steadily catching up with Britain and the United States. But the war abruptly reversed this progress, erasing virtually all the gains it had made since the end of the 19th century. After World War II ended in 1945, Japan made a new start toward economic reconstruction. With its new economic reforms within the country, help from its allies, and a highly educated and abundant labor force, the Japanese economy recovered quickly, and the recovery was followed by an era of rapid growth era. Fueled by its massive export industries and growing domestic markets, Japan became the second largest economy in 1978, and was seen as the next economic superpower that was going to overtake the United States, in a similar way we might see China today. Post-World War II, industries in Japan mostly consisted of large, modern industrial enterprise groupings called keiretsu. Many industrial enterprises consolidated to form larger and more efficient units, and the coordination of activities within these corporate groups enhanced industrial efficiency. They were also given unfair support from the government in the form of enormous loans distributed by the state-owned National Bank of Japan. Thus these alliances had access to an infinite stream of cash to finance their aggressive expansion abroad, while at the same time the government would block foreign companies from expanding into the Japanese market. The US was becoming concerned that its domestic manufacturing was starting to be outcompeted by countries like West Germany and Japan, especially in the auto industry. In 1985, the Plaza Accord was signed between France, Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Japan, to manipulate exchange rates by depreciating the US dollar relative to the Japanese yen and the German Deutsche Mark. The idea was to correct trade imbalances between the US and Germany and the US and Japan. This made American manufacturers more competitive globally and domestically. Though this affected Japanese exporters, the Japanese yen appreciated in value, making its citizens and companies richer. Japan also became a major player in the global financial market and started buying major assets all over the world. Japanese companies and products were conquering the world. Real estate in Japanese cities exploded in value, and the values of companies listed on the stock market were growing as well. Everyone saw Japan as the unstoppable future global superpower. Everyone thought the prices would go up forever. By 1991, Japan had been growing extremely fast for 3 consecutive decades. The rapid acceleration of asset prices and overheated economic activity, along with an uncontrolled money supply and credit expansion, created a price bubble. As a preemptive measure to reduce the impact of lost exports after the Plaza Accord, the Bank of Japan reduced interest rates, which in turn further speculated the stock market and real estate. And in early 1992, this price bubble burst. People saw their net worth evaporate overnight, and many were left with debts. The same problem existed for businesses as well. Some economists believe the Plaza Accord and the US influence contributed to the Japanese asset price bubble, while many others believe that it's due to the delayed action by the Bank of Japan to address the issue. Years following the bubble burst, it was revealed that corruption was widespread in Japanese businesses and government, from insider trading to stock manipulation and fraud and bribery. Many companies were surviving only on the never-ending supply of cheap money borrowed from the state. The price bubble burst kicked off the beginning of stagnation. Consumer spending tanked as the demand for goods failed, and so did their prices. The economy went into deflation mode. Deflation might sound like a good thing for consumers, but lower prices are a reflection of lower demand. Lower demand leads to lower revenues, which forces companies to lay off existing employees, hire fewer people, and affect salaries as well. Lower household income meant that people had less money to buy things, which further reduced demand and in turn reduced prices. This is a vicious feedback loop that is hard to resolve. Also, this makes it really hard for people to pay back their debts as well. The 1990s in Japan came to be known as the lost decade. The next 2 decades were also not much better. By the time Japan sort of recovered, by early 2000, China had already taken up their place globally. For a long time, Japan was the go-to place for low-cost mass manufacturing, but they could no longer compete on price or quantity in international markets. In order to break free the economy from stagnation, Japan started to adopt radical and aggressive approaches. But, unfortunately, it had very little impact, and the Japanese economy never fully recovered, making the last 3 decades collectively known as the lost decades. Japanese working and hiring culture is very rigid, intense, and different from any other job market in the world. Many companies care to hire only fresh graduates, and that too only once a year. University graduates go through a mass hiring process at the end of their study, and if they get a job, they keep that job for decades until retirement, lifetime employment. Many companies will only promote from within, grooming and cultivating their employees throughout their careers. This practice of staying with your employer until the end of your career is still wildly followed in Japan, and if you fail to do that, then you were left out in the cold, and the doors of most companies will remain closed to you forever. During the economic boom, it was not that hard to get a corporate job, but after 1990, most companies froze their hiring entirely for almost the entire decade, to keep all of their lifelong employees during the economic crisis. By 2000, companies resumed their hiring, but only selected new graduates, and also finding a job became much harder. It was too late for a whole generation of people who graduated in the 1990s. Companies would not hire them as they were hiring only fresh graduates. Millions of people who graduated during this time were left behind, unable to get permanent jobs, and ended up moving from one low-wage, dead-end part-time job to another. They became known as the lost generation of Japan. Since the Japanese economy never fully recovered, more young people graduating in the following decades also joined their ranks. Millions of people who are part of the lost generation make up the age group that is the most important for the economy of any country. Japan has an estimated 613,000 middle-aged hikikomori, a term used to describe socially withdrawn adolescents who hole up in their bedrooms, usually being completely financially dependent on their parents. These are some of those who could not fulfill the requirements expected of them by the Japanese society, and more younger generations are joining this social phenomenon. The effects of the lost generation are believed to be a part of the reasons for some major acts of violence in Japan, including the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Japan today is experiencing what's called a superaging society that is unprecedented anywhere else in the world. Today about 27% of the total population, which is approximately 36 million people, are above the age of 65. Japan has the highest life expectancy in the world. The average Japanese person is expected to live up to the old age of 85 years. The incredibly long lives of people in a country are in general a huge sign of tremendous success. But when low birth rates and other economic situations are added, this becomes a major crisis. Like every other developed country, Japan has low birth rates. While in the 1920s Japanese women on average were having 5 children, today the average is just a tad over 1.4. The majority of developed countries look at immigration as a solution to plummeting birth rates. But, Japan has always resisted this option as the Japanese culture opposes the concept of immigration. And as a result, Japan is today the sixth least diverse country in the entire world. Then comes the issue of the lost generation. Most of the lost generation, now in their 30s and 40s, were never economically secure enough to start families of their own, as they never had proper jobs and careers. Japan's 2015 census revealed there were 3.4 million people in their 40s and 50s who had not married and lived with their parents. In any country in the world, the elderly are dependent on the taxes paid by people in what's called the productive age. But in Japan, this will be at some point simply no longer sustainable. All put together, Japan has a shrinking population problem. In 2021, Japan's population is about 2.4 million people less than it was in 2008, and it's going to get worse if not addressed immediately. The Japanese government is aware of the negative impacts of the lost generation and the rising number of hikikomori. Numerous initiatives are being created to support the lost generation back on its feet, and help reintegrate those who had secluded themselves from society. Even though Japan is still a strong economy, it has yet to be fully recovered and is still working on the issues created by the lost generation, shrinking workforce, aging population, and recent COVID-19 pandemic situation. Being one of the strongest and most experienced economies in the world, is Japan capable enough to overcome these issues? Time will tell.